those who have been the beneficiaries of this.
Reverend Sharpton, I want to start off today with the controversy that is unfolding very rapidly as we see the surrendering of two co-conspirators in this Georgia 2020 election RICO case. We have Scott Hall and also John Eastman that are surrendering today in court. And there are in total 19 conspirators. This is what we're just seeing. As we're watching this unfold, what is your opinion as you're watching all this come to an head? And they all have until noon on Friday to surrender, but this is who we have right now on this today.
Well, I think that as we look at it, we should not look at it like we're watching a serial episodal kind of television show. We're talking about people that tried to rob the American people in general, Georgia in particular, of their votes. And they conspired to do it and put into action a plan to do it, led according to the indictment by the President of the United States. So I think a lot of people are used to watching, television series and what's going to happen next week, and not stopping to realize these people, in effect, tried to undermine the very government of the United States that this man, the president, was sworn to protect. We're seeing something unprecedented in history of this country, and we're seeing something that we condemn smaller, what we call banana republics, for doing. That's what they are being arraigned for. And to think that not only they would have this kind of plan to do, but that the president that did it, who is now the former president, has the arrogance and the audacity to say, let me run and be president again. As he's running, he will be fingerprinted and mugshot in 2 days.
And that's what we really haven't seen that in some of the other, people are wondering, is he going to have cuffs on him? What's going to happen? Georgia is saying that they're going to treat him just like they treat anybody else. That's something that we're seeing in Georgia. Just explain again why this Georgia case, even over so many others, are so important and so vital, especially for the Black community to watch on this one.
It's important because had he been able to get the Georgia officials to lie, he would have won the state of Georgia. It might have changed the whole outcome of the election, which means we would have had a fraudulent president sitting in the White House 4 years that would have continued stacking the federal courts and the Supreme Court with anti-Black, anti-women, anti-student loans, all of that. The power he would have had in 4 more years would have been even more devastating than the power he used the 4 years he was in. It is particularly egregious to the Black community because he was doing it that would impact Fulton County, which is majority Black. So it is undermining our right to vote, a vote that we suffered, some died for. So it is particularly racist to us. And I think that that is why you don't like to see anyone go to jail when our community's been the recipient of so many things that we've seen go to jail that were innocent. But you cannot not look at this and say that they are getting what they deserve and more, if in fact they are convicted and imprisoned, every last one of them.
How do you see, in your mind, these developments influencing, if at all, public perception, looking at the broader discourse around the allegations facing President Trump and his allies? I say that in light of the recent CBS Young Gov poll, which showed that 71% of those planning to vote for Trump believe that he still speaks truth, higher than their trust levels for friends and family, which was 63%, and media figures 56%, and even religious leaders at 42%. It is almost if they have made this man their God.
It is evidence, that poll is evidence that you're not dealing with a political party or a political figure, you're dealing with a cult. These people are almost Jim Jones drinking the Kool-Aid.
Mhm.
Because how do you trust a guy that has clearly made it publicly known that he would cheat on his wives, that he would grab women by their privates, that he has cheated banks out of loans, and you say you would believe him more than you would your pastor? You believe him more than your friends and family? That's a cult. That's somebody that has that if somebody in our family said, "I'm a member of Reverend so and so's church, and I believe him more than you, and I'll do whatever he says," we would say that's cult-like. And that's what you're dealing with is a political cult, which is why it is naive to me for anyone running against him to think they can get those voters. They're having a debate Wednesday night, but to try to get the MAGA voters is a waste of time. They ought to be trying to get the other voters, even in the Republican primaries, even the independents, because to go after people that drunk the Kool-Aid is a waste of energy.
Let's talk about that. So the first presidential debate is going to take place on Wednesday. We've got Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Senator Tim Scott, South Carolina, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy. I always have to take a pause because I'm like, how did you get in this mix? Former Vice President Mike Pence, ex-New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who's been extremely vocal now in his attacks on Trump, North Dakota Governor Doug Bergman, and former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson. As I ran through this list and I keep going through it, and some of those who we've seen their votes when it comes to issues that were important to the Black community, what are the differences that you're seeing? What are you looking to hear? But when I hear that and even look at some of the voting records, they align, even though they may not be verbally as we see Trump is. Many of them align still in their policies for communities and for running government.
That is why it is very, very troubling to me that you will see a debate on which 2/3 of it could be on Donald Trump rather than on policy and on the political positions they take. Because if they don't have to deal with the affirmative action reversal, they don't have to deal with student debt loan forgiveness cancel. They don't have to deal with women's right to choose. They don't have to deal with LGBTQ rights. Then what are they debating other than Donald Trump? And I'm afraid that we're going to hear one side defend Trump, Christie and others denounce Trump, and it'll be a Trump debate and not really show what they want to do if they were to be elected president. You know, I ran in 2004 in the Democratic primaries, as you know, for president. And every time I went on that stage, I knew it was unlikely that I was going to win for president, particularly that was the first election after 9/11. But I said, I want to get these points into the American people. I want this policy to be driven. We are not mentioned. That's why I wanted to be on the stage. Well, you have to ask yourself, why are these people wanting to be on the stage? They're on the stage to have advanced their career, not advance anyone's community. And I always look at people before and after I ran, or what are they walking out there for? I can't identify one of those that are going to debate Wednesday night on their reason for being on that stage other than personal ambition. They're not identified with any policies. They're not identified with any cause or any kind of political agenda that they've championed. It's all ambition.
I want to switch homes just a little bit, and I say switch, but it really deals with everything. We're on the cusp of the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. Many organizations coming together, dozens and dozens, and you are going to be the ones helping to lead this. Given the rich history of the 63 March that focused on jobs and freedom, how do you envision the impact of this year's march to be different, especially in light of today's socio-political climate?
I think that if you look in context at the 63 March, there was a lot of movements going on. You had the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was doing student sit-ins in the South. You had CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, James Farmer, The head of the court, James Farmer, couldn't even make the march. He was in jail in Louisiana because they were doing freedom rides. And it was the march really crystallized an ongoing movement around Jim Crow segregation. People that came to that march had to, from below the Mason-Dixie line, had to ride in the back of buses, couldn't stop and eat at restaurants on the road, couldn't use the public toilet. It was clear what they wanted: jobs and freedom. Freedom from Jim Crow, jobs, labor was the main point. 60 years later, the issue is similar. When you're dealing with the economic disparities, we're seeing artists that are literally in Hollywood on strike while we're doing this march. They're saying you can't get minimum wage or livable wage in Hollywood. Where you gonna get it? You're seeing voting rights being eroded in many states around this country. You're seeing affirmative action killed. You're seeing women's right to choose killed. You're seeing the Supreme Court saying that LGBTQ can't demand that people not discriminate against them on social media and their business. So this march will be as 63 inclusive. Yes, it is Martin Luther King III and Andre Waters King and I calling it who are Black, but also we're working with Asian American groups and Jonathan Greenblatt from Anti-Racist and the LGBTQ, just like they did, and labor leaders, the AFL-CIO and all of their member groups, just like they did in 63. Because the purpose of the march is to impact policy and legislation. We want to show right there in the nation's capital, in front of Lincoln's Memorial, those politicians that will be coming back off of summer break, that there are hundreds of thousands of us that are of different races, different orientations, different genders, saying that we want you to correct what was done to affirmative action, correct what you've done in terms of the economic inequality, correct what you've done in terms of voting rights and police reform. You must show force. The thing that gets me, Ebony, is that we've seen all these things happen in the Supreme Court: women's right to choose, affirmative action, economic indisparity, voting rights, and there has not been a national march. I was saying to one of my callers on my radio show the other day, guy said, Reverend, I agree with you, we need to answer, but aren't we tired of marching? I said, let me ask you something. When was the last march? When was the last national march? And he looked at the phone, I guess, because he stopped for a minute. He said, yeah, you're right. We haven't had one in a couple of years since you called George Floyd. I said, so how are y'all tired of something we're not doing? I see the MAGA folk marching. We've not responded. So are you asking people in the Senate and the Congress to respond to something that we've not shown them a show of force that we have? Marching is not designed to solve a problem. Marching is designed to expose a problem. Because when they see tens of thousands of people out there, they say, well, wait a minute, a lot of people are upset about this. They can vote against me. Let's look at this. That's what the 63 march did. That's what the 23 march is going to do 60 years later.
That leads to my very last question. Quickly, literally, you kind of rolled right into it. That given the history that you just went down from policy to hate crimes, there was a great article in the Washington Post today talking about the murder of James Byrd that it's almost like people forget about. And to the tragic end of George Floyd's life, we've seen public sentiment kind of ebb and flow. There was the recent drop in support for Black Lives Matter movement that was indicated in a Pew Research Center poll suggests that people's memories, for some reason, is fading. And as you lead this year's, one of the ones leading this year's march, how do you plan to address, or will you even address, as you give a call to action, support, fluctuating support to keep the legacies and the calls for justice alive at the forefront of this national consciousness?
The way you do it is by putting big numbers in Washington, and people see, wait a minute, they're not asleep, and it is not flowing there. Why did we have such a peak when George Floyd happened? Mm-hmm. Why did we have such interest when George Floyd happened? One, we saw the video. But second, the reaction of people marching all over the world. And even in COVID, even in the pandemic, we brought 200,000 people to Washington, exactly where we're going Saturday. That's what caused a lot of people to stop and say, oh, not only did I see the film, but people are outraged about this. We've seen videos before, and we didn't see that kind of outrage. The fact that we've been so silent and docile is why Saturday is important, because we're giving people the impression we are not that concerned about ourselves. And people are only emboldened when they feel like there is no reaction.
Perfectly said. Thank you, Rev Sharpton, for joining me for this conversation. And as you always say, that this march is about a continuation and that we must continue in this fight and not ebb and flow, but just stay in the fight. Thank you so much for
Thank you, Ebony.
conversation.